In a world obsessed with rankings, two men dare to chisel greatness out of metaphorical granite, one wildly subjective opinion at a time. This show, every episode, we select four icons from a single topic and immortalize them in our own personal halls of fame. Subjective, absolutely. Debatable, always. Set in stone. Until next week, welcome to the Mount Rushmore show, where your top four says everything about you. I'm Mike Mintz. He's Joe Mintz, and we got a good one here for you today. But before we get into that, Joe, we wanted to recap a little bit from last week and the ideas of the best cookout foods available.
Yeah, I got some interesting feedback from that one. I guess some of our listeners have an appetite for food, or depending on what time they're listening to that episode. But Mike, I got to ask you, what'd you have for lunch after that?
I had leftovers that I reheated. I didn't do
Oh
anything
man, I
special.
thought you were cooking up ribeyes.
I considered it. Yeah.
But one thing one of our listeners mentioned to us that wasn't brought up was pulled pork,
Mhm.
ribs, and brisket. Mike, is that an honorable mention for you? Is that one that just slipped by? What do you think?
This has been, I would say, in my experience, this has been a more recent phenomenon. This idea of the smoking of these pulled porks and these briskets, and some people go, and pardon the pun here, hog wild on this stuff. I mean, they'll spend, especially things like pulled pork. You got to get them up to like 200 degrees. Things like brisket, you got to baby them. You got to like check them, and it takes like 12, 13 hours. Awesome stuff. By the way, I'm not knocking it. I think that when people put in that type of effort, it always comes out great. I love the smoked meats. I would say though, I always kind of think of cookouts as more of like when I was younger versus the more modern version of them. But I would say that is an absolute fact that lately, and I would say in the last 10, 15 years, I've seen a big push towards these more smoked type meats.
Yeah, the Traeger grill, I think we
Mm-hmm.
mentioned it last week, is a game changer for these cookouts now. I personally don't eat pork, and I'm not a huge fan of the fatty meat, so it was an easy pass for me. But I had to bring it up if maybe it was just a miss. But if not, if ribeye and chicken take the bait, then that's your Mount Rushmore.
Well, and I think that there's a place for these for smoked meats, especially. And here's my here's my one complaint is normally if you go to a place and they're like, oh, we're smoking whatever they're smoking, whatever time you had planned for dinner, go ahead and add an hour, maybe two to that. It's a very unscientific science. Let's put it that way. So
So it's less about the food, it's more about the work that goes into the food with a lack of consistency for the effort, potentially,
yeah,
depending on who's smoking.
yeah. Well, I mean, some people call it the easy bake oven, and certainly everything tastes better smoked. I mean, there's no doubt about that. Like smoked burgers or even smoked any sausage. If you want to smoke a hot dog, go ahead. It's probably going to be better. I think that when you get into some of the more difficult things, some of the pulled pork, some of the ones that take a little bit more effort, there is that consistency can be kind of all over the place.
Interesting. That's a good take, but I had to bring it up. I had to address the elephant in the room for some of our listeners. I'm sure they'll appreciate that, but it didn't make our Mount Rushmore. But to each their own.
Well, and I mean that's why we do this show is we're going to have our picks. And I'm telling you, Joe, I can tell before we get into this one here that there's probably at least one on my list that's not even on your radar because that's just the way I roll sometimes. So
Interesting. I've noticed that about you, Mike. That's what makes this fun. Now, for this week's episode, the people we'll be mentioning were probably not enjoying any of the cookout foods we mentioned leading up to what they were pursuing, and you'll understand why in a moment. But we're going to um, time this with Manny Pacquiao's comeback fight on July 20th, 2025. We're going to examine what truly makes a pound for pound great and carve our four fates into the boxing mountain this week with the Mount Rushmore of pound for pound boxers.
yeah, and Pacquiao is one of those guys that is he's certainly in the discussion to some degree. I mean, and it's really interesting, Joe, him coming back at this point in his career, especially when you think about how kind of things ended in the Floyd Mayweather fight and stuff. But boxing is full of boxers that have stuck around for years after their prime.
Sure, You've seen it actually in a sad way in many cases. People that get a little bit punch drunk. It was a shame what happened to Muhammad Ali late in his career. But boxing has always been about legends. But every so often, a fighter does something that forces you to rethink what greatness means. And the man Manny Pacquiao, at 46 years old, he's a former eight division champion, and he's fighting Mario Barrios, a man 20 years his junior, for the WBC welterweight title. Um, and I do wonder where Pacquiao ranks in the scheme of boxing. I think he does too, which is probably leading him to want to take on this fight. Continue to carve his greatness and legacy in the sport. Um, but regardless of weight, we want to talk about who we think makes some of the greatest fighters in their respective classes. Because boxing is one of those interesting things. You don't throw Manny Pacquiao against Mike Tyson, right? It just wouldn't be a fair fight. Um, but weight classes haven't always been the way we know them today. Um, it actually kind of had bare knuckle beginnings. The early days of boxing, I'm talking 17, 1800s at this point, there were no weight classes. It was man versus man, no matter the size, which obviously led to mismatches that compromised fighter safety and fairness. But I don't think that was the objective back then. And then in the middle to late 1800s, they introduced divisions. They called it the Marquess of Queensberry rules. This was 1867. This helped formalize boxing, but weight classes took shape in the late 1800s with the first divisions being lightweight, middleweight, and heavyweight. And over time, they expanded that to featherweight, flyweight, and some sports even more. Because today there's 17 official weight classes across most boxing bodies. But that evolution helped many fans appreciate not just brute force, but technical brilliance, defensive mastery, speed, which enter the concept of pound for pound. So now we're asking who's the best if weight was equal. Now, each division has kind of its own style. Lightweights and below have more of an emphasis on cardio, footwork, high punch volume. Think like Lomachenko and Pacquiao. Whereas you have the welterweight to middleweights, which is more about precision, timing, balance. That's where you look at the Sugar Ray Leonards, Canelo Alvarez types. And then heavyweights. Those are the one punch knockout power and durability like a Tyson, Foreman, and Fury. Being pound for pound great means dominating your division and proving that your skills could beat anyone regardless of size. Now, what defines pound for pound greatness for me, Mike, is dominance in multiple eras or divisions, consistency against elite competition, adaptability and ring IQ, undefeated or iconic career moments, and then also I take into account the cultural or global impact that person made. And for my four picks, they checked all those boxes and then some.
Well, I think that that's a pretty good criteria for pound. Most of the people on my list, and I'll put a caveat in there, but most of them fought across different divisions. And I think that was a big one for me too. When we're talking pound for pound, how did they do moving up or moving down? But it's for me, it's not 100% that either. So
Well, Mike, do you want to kick it off with your list first? I'm sure we'll share some of these. I don't know yet. You're all kind of a wild card, as you mentioned to start.
well, I'll start, and here's my first head, and this is my George Washington, if you will, and it's Sugar Ray Robinson. Sugar Ray, there's plenty of sugars out there, and even Sugar Ray Leonard might be on somebody's list for pound. But the term pound for pound kind of is, well, invented for Sugar Ray. I mean, the word, the boxing jargon comes out. It's not just your uncle yelling at the pay per view who's the best pound for pound, but the actual phrase was invented for Sugar Ray. Like journalists had to stop what they were doing and go, okay, we need a whole new system of measurement because Sugar Ray Robinson just broke boxing. And so to think about it like that, here's a guy that fought, he has 109 wins in his career, fought over 200 fights over all different crazy things. Here's a couple of names. Muhammad Ali, Joe Louis, Roberto Duran, Sugar Ray Leonard, all named this guy as the best boxer. Muhammad Ali, whose nickname is the greatest, looks at Sugar Ray Robinson and goes, yeah, but that guy's ridiculous, right? Like Sugar Ray Robinson's one of these all times. 1997, the Ring magazine names him greatest pound for pound fighter in history. In 99, the AP says he's the welterweight of the century, the middleweight of the century, fighter of the century, at which point I assume the century just gave up and said, fine, he wins. Everyone else is playing for second. It would be an absolute sin for me to leave him off of this list. He did not fight during a time that I watched in the 50s, obviously. But going through some research and stuff, this name just kept popping up and popping up. And the further and further I dug, the more I go, how do you not go with a guy like Sugar Ray Robinson?
Mike, couldn't agree more. I think he's on everyone's Mount Rushmore, including mine. Talk about dominance across divisions. He was a world welterweight and a 5-time middleweight champion. I think about Jake LaMotta from Raging Bull. For many of you that don't know, the Robert De Niro and Scorsese teamed up to make a very dark, interesting movie that won De Niro an Academy Award for Best Actor.
The anti-Rocky, in my opinion. Yeah. So
yeah, very flawed individual, but dominant boxer in his day. And Gene Fullmer, Carmen Basilio, sorry, some of the more notable wins he had. I actually think a lot about Mickey Ward's brother, who Christian Bale played in The Fighter. Not a great outcome in life for that guy. I can't remember his first name, but his claim to fame was that he knocked down Sugar Ray Robinson once. Didn't win the fight, but he knocked him down. They argue that he tripped. You might get in a bar fight with Mickey Ward's brother or Mickey Ward if you brought that up. But I think how big a deal it is just to be in the ring with him. But why he's on the mountain to me is perfect 85-0 amateur record before turning pro. Not to mention 109 knockouts as a pro. He won 91 consecutive fights as a professional between the 40s and early 50s. And he was the first boxer to win the middleweight title 5 times. He combined power, speed, footwork, creativity, and you mentioned this earlier, he inspired other fighters, including Ali, but also Sugar Ray Leonard and Mike Tyson have given him nods. If Ali was the greatest, then Robinson was the blueprint.
I dig it. I dig it. Yeah, and I think you're right. He's kind of a consensus number one pick. Well, since we share that one, I guess I'll go with my number two then, Joe.
Go for it.
All right. So number two, this is one that I actually saw in real time and probably isn't on a lot of people's top fours, but he is to me just because of what he meant at the moment. And this is Pernell Whitaker. Sweet Pea, he's one of those guys that probably should be better known than he really is. A 90s dominant defensive fighter, and maybe that's part of the problem. Olympic gold medalist, undisputed lightweight champion. He also won titles in light welterweight, super welterweight. But really what people kind of forget about Whitaker is his were some of the strangest ones and probably some of the biggest like controversial ones. He is going to have one of the worst decisions ever in a title fight, a split decision loss. Most analysts are going to consider it to be one of the worst choices. Whitaker would then fight to a draw against another great pound for pound fighter in Julio Cesar Chavez. This draw would lead to the famous Sports Illustrated cover with the text "robbed" across the cover. Whitaker wouldn't lose again until 1997 when he's defeated by De La Hoya in another close fight and another controversial finish. Whitaker is one of those guys that probably he only had 4 losses, but most of his losses come in his later years. He was so dominant for maybe 10 to 12 years and beat some of the biggest names, but he's one of those guys that fell off at the end in kind of disappointing fashion.
Mike, I'll be honest, I don't know much about him. That name is past me. This was a nice education on him, so I don't have much to comment on. But fascinating career. What era was this?
This was the 90s. Late 80s, early 90s. He was in the 80 Olympics, and so he's going to go on.
Why do you think, I mean, when you think of the 80s and 90s, you think of Vander Holyfield, you think of Mike Tyson. Why do you think a name like him didn't become more marketable?
I think the problem with Pernell is that he was a defensive fighter. He's a guy that was very much like a Floyd Mayweather. Mayweather was able to create this persona around his style, but not the most exciting style. Pernell Whitaker, I remember at the time they didn't call them defensive fighters, they called them points fighters back then. And he was definitely a points fighter, a guy that was looking to not just win, but win every single round all the way through. And he's going to fight some of the biggest names in the 90s, and do really well. But it's certainly one of those guys that, you're going to look at the dudes, and a lot of my guys on the list have lots of knockouts. Whitaker's not the kind of knockout guy.
Yeah, it brings up an interesting conversation of where boxing is turned, and it's less about how great a fighter you are. It's more about the personality that the public can gravitate towards. That is what sells big fights for you to participate in. Likewise, gets people to want to watch you. I mean, I don't think he's on our Mount Rushmore. I can't call you out, Mike, yet. I haven't finished. But Jake Paul is a great example of someone that we tune into because we love him or hate him, less so because we want to actually we admire his boxing skills. Whereas you have fighters that are truly great in their divisions, take a Lomachenko, that you grab 10 people on the street, probably 2 people know who that is. Whereas you grab 10 people in the street, 9 or 10 people know who Jake Paul is. But the sport's really changed a lot as far as how we consume it. Floyd Mayweather is another good example of someone who struggled to get big fights as a great fighter until he changed his name to Floyd Money Mayweather, embracing the villain, which made him to promoters a great guy to start marketing the fights. So we could then be excited to watch his greatness and appreciate it. I think for the guy you picked, it was just a missed opportunity not lean into some sort of brand that the public could resonate with.
Exactly. And this is, of course, during the same time period that Tyson is knocking out people in the first round. And
And he's
that's
incredibly
catching.
marketable. He's running his mouth, he's saying crazy things, and we love it or we hate it, but regardless, we're watching it.
Yeah. And I'm putting Whitaker, he's certainly my ribeye steak here. It's my outside pick, but I'm putting him on there because he's a person that I grew up watching. Like anytime a boxing match was on, he was on the undercard because he was such a big name at the time.
Yeah, good pick. Good sleeper there. I'm gonna go for my second pick with Floyd Mayweather.
Oh,
As
good
it's already
choice.
brought up, Floyd Money. 27 knockouts, titles in 5 weight divisions. His most notable wins is someone we already mentioned with Manny Pacquiao. Even though I will argue that he fought Pacquiao slightly past his ideal prime. So there's a bit of an asterisk in that win to me, but still has the W. Also, Canelo Alvarez, Oscar De La Hoya, Shane Mosley. Um, he's on my mountain because one, he's undefeated, which is virtually unheard of in modern boxing. Um, in fact, I would argue that because of Floyd Mayweather, many boxers today avoid taking on the biggest fighters if they can because they weigh more importance on an undefeated record than taking chances. Whereas older boxers, even Sugar Ray Robinson, he lost several times, which is okay. Same with Muhammad Ali, Mike Tyson, because they fought the best at the time. Whereas many boxers don't do that. Mayweather was very strategic. Not that he wasn't great, but he was strategic in when and how he fought people in his terms. But brought up earlier with your last pick, Mayweather was known for his defensive genius. He had that shoulder roll, the reflexes, the ringed generalship. He was also the master promoter, as I mentioned. He transformed, I would say, boxing economics through pay-per-view revenue. And he became Floyd Money Mayweather because the deals he cut to get back end, which made him, I would argue, one of the wealthiest, if not the wealthiest boxer today. He beat over 20 world champions, and his boxing IQ and adaptability allowed him to neutralize nearly every style. He didn't just win fights, he made opponents look ordinary, I would say.
Mayweather's a great pick, and everything you said is absolutely true about him. And it certainly illustrates some of the issues with boxing. The fact that these guys get to pick when they're fighting and who they're fighting. I mean, we think
Leverage.
we think about 90s and Don King and some of the stuff he did, but it's not just that. It's even into today where the fighters are basically their own entities and they're making deals instead of something like the UFC where the fighters are under contract and everything. What you end up with is a guy like Mayweather who is not just strategic in the ring, he's strategic out of the ring. He's making choices to fight these guys at, like you said, strategic times. I honestly think Mayweather probably could have beat these guys probably at any time, but I don't think he was willing to risk it. I think he was taking opportunities that were being given to him and counterpunching when it made sense in and out of the ring.
Yeah, but I can't knock the accolades regardless. Flawed uh, boxer, but he's representative of a time in boxing.
No, Mayweather's a great pick and probably on quite a few people's list. 50-0, that's hard to argue with. I think Marciano's the only other guy to do it. I did not have Mayweather, but I did have another boxer that I hope you have at least heard of, and this is Roy Jones Jr. on my list. So, Roy Jones Jr., another guy that I kind of grew up watching, also Olympic silver medalist, starts his career in 1989. 16-0 with 16 knockouts to start his career. He's not going to really lose a fight until he's 35 years old. 5 of his 10 losses come after he turned 40. He won titles in middleweight, super middleweight, light heavyweight, and heavyweight. But beyond all of that, Joe, the reason I'm putting him on the list is he was exciting to watch. He was one of those guys you could turn it on and everybody would just be enamored with the style of Roy Jones Jr.
Great pick. My relationship with Roy Jones is my obsession as a child with Fight Night Round 2, which he was on the cover of and a big part of. My other relationship with him is the exhibition fight he lost to, or maybe I think they tied, but I would say
Yeah, yeah.
lost to Mike Tyson. This was more of a grudge match, like Sylvester Stallone, De Niro sort of fight, but still, I didn't grow up watching his prime fights, but I did love his video game, and I do appreciate what he's accomplished.
Yeah, and outside of the ring too. I mean, he's done ring announcing for HBO, and he's made a bit of a career there.
Yeah, huge name in the
Fights,
sport, no doubt.
yeah, and I wonder how much of that this Manny Pacquiao we're going to look back on Roy Jones Jr.'s later career. Though maybe he shouldn't have come back. I don't know. I hope that Manny Pacquiao wins because he's exciting and I love his career. But I also have a little bit of a thought back there going, man, it's always tough to come back to a sport like that.
I wonder if George Foreman's comeback to win the heavyweight title in the 90s inspired a lot of these guys rolling out the carpet a little later than they should. Because obviously it worked out really well for Foreman in many ways. And I think many people think they can replicate that success. And let's be honest, they're competitors, right? You want to go
Mm-hmm.
to the wheels fall off. That doesn't just turn off that competitive edge. If you think you still got it, why not show it?
No, I agree. Joe, who do you got? What's your next pick?
I'm going to pick a fighter who came out with Roy Jones and beat him at a later point, which doesn't really count. And that's, but still, great fighter in his own respect. And that's Mike Tyson.
Oh yeah, Tyson.
The knockout king, undisputed heavyweight champion, record of 50-6, 44 of them being knockouts. Some of the notable wins being Larry Holmes, Michael Spinks, Trevor Berbick. Why he's on the mountain is youngest heavyweight champion in history at 20 years old. Undefeated WBA, WBC, and IBF titles. He won 37 straight fights to start his career. 33 of those by knockout. He was lightning in a pan when he first came out. His early career dominance was, I'll use the word terrifying. Opponents often lost before the first punch. Just getting in the ring, his intimidation, his aura scared people. And despite personal struggles, I would say he remains the most recognizable boxing icon since Ali. He's had a up and down career with the public, obviously spending time in prison, making a comeback, and really going out of the public's eye in a bit of a sad way. I think he had some substance abuse issues at the end of his career and a little bit after. But now he's back in the limelight. He's written a book. He's been in shows. He has podcasts. He's even doing comeback fights here and there with Jake Paul, and he's kind of gained the public approval again based on his early struggles in the '90s through his self-awareness and reflection and work on himself. I'm a fan of Ali. I actually read his autobiography, about 500 pages, and I probably got it done in a matter of 2 weeks. It was that good and compelling. But he redefined intimidation and power in my mind and made boxing must-watch TV. And if we're talking about any one boxer that I grew up as the cultural zeitgeist, there's no one more influential than Mike Tyson.
Same here. Tyson dominated my childhood. The famous loss with Buster Douglas was huge. He was on Mike Tyson's Punch Out. It was a Nintendo game. Was one of the best ones was his game. And so you think about Tyson, you think about the knockouts, the fact that at any moment one punch was going to put somebody away with Mike Tyson. And when we talk about pound for, I'm really glad you picked this guy because I got a guy on my list that was clearly just a heavyweight too. The Tyson was a heavyweight. He didn't go around to different eras or different weight classes. It wouldn't have mattered if he was a different weight class. I think he would have dominated anybody when it comes down to style. The guy fought basically in a phone booth and would knock you out with a single punch. It was incredible.
Yeah, you wonder what would have happened if he took it more serious. I mean, he's been very public about his issues with Don King, his struggles when his original trainer passed away. That was kind of his father figure and mentor. So you want, and obviously he got big for his britches. He let fame get to him at a young age, right? Like most people do. And he stopped taking people as seriously. And he took his foot off the gas, and it affected what his career could have been. And you just wonder if he was dialed in or had better mentorship at the time, what his greatness truly would have elevated him to. And also the time in prison, which took him away as well. There's a bit of a what if there, but I think that I don't think there's anyone more dominant in a shorter span than Mike Tyson, although short. Which is why I wouldn't say he's the greatest, but one of the greatest.
Yeah, he's definitely got to be near the list. I didn't have him on my list because I went with another name, Joe, and this is Muhammad Ali, another heavyweight boxer, another guy that didn't move around weight classes. But when we talk about dominance in boxing, in an era where it was probably the toughest era for heavyweights, the biggest names of all time, George Foreman, Joe Louis, Frazier, all of these guys. And Muhammad Ali was it's not just the talk, he could back it up in the ring, and that is rare air.
Mike, we're gonna share this one. We had to. I saved the best for last. But everyone has got to have Muhammad Ali on their list in my mind. Um, and his accolades aren't necessarily as impressive numbers wise, but at the time he took on the biggest and the baddest, and he wasn't afraid of anyone. And he also had the personality and cultural impact to back it up. 56-5 record, 37 knockouts, three-time world heavyweight champion. When I think about his biggest wins, I think of Frazier.
Mm-hmm.
I think of Foreman, which the one that we all counted him out for. Sonny Liston, Ken Norton. And why he's on the mountain is not just because he was three-time heavyweight champ in arguably the toughest time to be heavyweight champ with the most stiff competition. But I think about iconic fights like the Rumble in the Jungle and the Thrill in Manila. He had a blend of athleticism and charisma like no one before. One of the more quotable athletes I think has ever existed. He refused induction into the Vietnam War draft, becoming a symbol of resilience and cultural pride. He revolutionized how heavyweights moved, light on his feet, almost like a dancer. He wasn't just the best heavyweight in my mind, he was the most important figure in sports history.
I agree. And he put boxing on the map in all respects. A lot of people become what they are now based on what they saw Ali do in the 60s and 70s. So
I
I'm
agree.
with you,
Well, we
Joe.
shared two. I thought we might share more.
Yeah, no, I threw out some wild ones in there, but I thought overall, I thought we did pretty good. A pretty good mixture of different boxers.
Well, Mike, I'd like to close on the Pacquiao comeback again. So, Pacquiao did make it over Mount Rushmore, but he's already a legend. the only 8 division champion in history, actually. But this comeback fight versus Barrios could add another chapter for his legacy. If he wins at 46 against a 29-year-old world champion, it might be the greatest comeback in boxing history. I would argue he could be on our previous Mount Rushmore of athletes post 40. I would say for this fight, watch for Pacquiao's footwork and angles versus Barrios, who's more height and jab. Um, I do wonder if age will catch up in those later rounds. But also, one thing age does give you is a very high ring IQ, which could carry the day. And Barrios isn't a slouch. He's young, hungry, and he is the WBC interim welterweight champ. Any thoughts before the fight, Mike?
Here's my one thought about it is I want to watch this fight and I'm going to be cheering for Pacquiao. So that's where I'm at. I want the underdog and the comeback story. Yeah. So I'll just run down my picks and then you'll do yours and we'll call it good. We shared 2, Sugar Ray Robinson, Muhammad Ali. I threw a wild card out there with Pernell Whitaker, whatever, man. I was a fan. He was cool in the 90s. Roy Jones Jr. also from my time period as well, Joe.
Yeah, I had Ali, Robinson, Mayweather, and Tyson. 4 men who didn't just dominate their weight class. I think they changed the sport. So I want to know who's on your Mount Rushmore. Kind of like the cookouts. If there's a barbecue, pulled pork, ribs, or brisket boxers that we missed, let us know.
Absolutely, man. Well, you've heard it from us. That's our 4. But the real question is who would you carve onto your mountain? Until the next episode, he's Joe Mintz. I'm Mike Mintz, and this is the Mount Rushmore Show.